more than a quarter of a century, she was the undisputed queen of the skies.
If you really love flying, then Concorde was the airliner for you.
The most advanced commercial jet ever.
A work of art, absolute work of art.
Costing more than £3 billion to develop. Taking 15 years to build. And flying faster than any airliner before or since.
Twice the speed of sound, 10% faster than a rifle bullet.
This is the extraordinary story of an extraordinary machine. Told by the makers.
Everybody thought it was a bloody good aircraft, and it's quite an experience just to look at it.
The pilots.
It was just a magical experience because you go to places that other people can't, up in 60,000 feet.
And the passengers.
You're drinking the best champagne, you're having the best food. The service is better than first class. It's Concorde class.
From its triumphant launch to its tragic demise.
Time to say goodbye, and they came in their thousands to do so.
This was the plane that defied the odds and defined the golden age of supersonic travel.
She was streets ahead of anything else. And quite honestly, the rest of the aviation world is just starting to catch up now.
Concorde began flying commercially in 1976, after costing around £3 billion to design, develop, and build. She was the fastest and most revolutionary airliner the world had ever seen. But for British Airways, she also cost a fortune to run.
There was an attitude in BA that it would fail. It was a question of not whether it would fail, when it would fail, and we could get rid of this thing. And in consequence, the aeroplane was losing many millions of pounds over the first 5-6 years.
BA had only taken Concorde on after pressure from the British government. But in 1981, it appointed a new chairman who refused to stand the losses any longer. Lord King was a ruthless cost-cutter who embodied the Thatcherite approach to business. Shortly after taking over, he laid off 15,000 BA staff. He also laid off most of the boardroom, preferring to look to other parts of the company for ideas on how to make it more profitable.
3, 2, 1, now.
I had written many letters to the board suggesting various ideas, and Lord King summoned me to his office and he said, I'm going to give you, Captain Walpole, a chance to put your money where your mouth has been for some time. I'm going to create a Concorde division within British Airways, and you are going to be in charge of it. You've got 2 years to turn it round. If you don't turn it round in that 2 years, I will terminate Concorde operations.
After accepting the challenge, the pilot followed his boss's example. He bypassed BA's executives and brought in his own people to help turn the operation around.
Captain Walpole rang me up and said, I hope you're not doing anything for the next year or two. We're starting Concorde division. So it was pretty unusual to actually have, in effect, 2 pilots running a tiny division.
The new division was formed in 1981, but its task was daunting. In the previous year, Concorde had recorded a £16 million loss.
Day one, we sort of sat down, had a cup of coffee in this tiny little cubbyhole of an office that we had, and thought, what are we going to do now?
The first step was to bring in researchers to find out more about their customers. They discovered that most weren't just powerful and wealthy. They were so high up in their organizations, they didn't book their own £4,000 return tickets.
So they came back with this, and I said, well, can you please go back and ask these people if they know what the fare is?
And it was incredibly surprising to us that something like 80% did not know what the fare was.
So this was the breakthrough in a way. I said, well, go back and ask them to guess. And almost invariably, they guessed that the fare was higher than it was. So back comes the advice from the orthodox marketing people. Well, we must spend more money telling them it's not that expensive. And I said, no, we'll just charge them what they think they're paying.
If you flew on Concorde, you really didn't care what the ticket was going to cost, either because you had so much money or because your company was paying anyway.
And like the Harrods effect, the more we put the fare up, the more passengers we got.
As well as tackling the fare structure, the new division overhauled the marketing. As pilots, they'd seen the public's affection and enthusiasm for the plane at first hand. They persuaded BA to start sharing that enthusiasm and make Concorde the star of its advertising and publicity campaigns.
It was seen as a white elephant. So all we did is we started saying, it's not white elephant, it's a golden eagle. Because we knew that it was a dream for a lot of people to go on it.
From probably about 1984 onwards, she became the British Airways flagship. And if you watch TV programmes of cricket matches, rugby matches, soccer matches, the open golf, lo and behold, a Concorde would fly over. Now, that wasn't accidental. That was deliberately planned.
By the mid-80s, every marketing opportunity was being exploited. Concorde was showcased as a plane with the speed capability of a fighter jet.
This is the only photograph of Concorde flying at Mach 2 supersonic speed, which I shot from a Tornado.
In 1986, the division created an extra special photo opportunity to mark Concorde's 10th anniversary of commercial flight.
We sat around and I said to Brian, just jokingly, well, let's do an air-to-air. Let's put all 7 aircraft up. He said, that's never going to happen. But actually, there is an opportunity to maybe fly 4 Concordes around the Christmas period where we're not flying them completely commercially.
And it happened on Christmas Eve. And we had staff, 400 staff on every aeroplane. And we went up and we had a chase plane taking pictures.
As you can see, here's our 2 pilots, and there's myself. And there's us taxiing out from Heathrow to undertake the actual shoot of the 4 Concordes. We went up about 10 minutes beforehand, and we circled and circled. We finally saw the 4 Concordes pop out of the cloud.
Thanks to Concorde's unique maneuverability, they were able to accomplish the first ever formation flying of a commercial airliner.
This is the actual last picture that I took before they all peeled off and we came back to Heathrow. But this is the echelon.
Everyone asked us, well, how did you get permission for doing these flights? And we said, very easy, we just didn't ask anyone.
By the time of the formation photo, the Concorde division had met and exceeded Lord King's challenge. It was now a money maker, taking centre stage in all BA's ad campaigns.
Last year, British Airways planes travelled over 150 million miles. That's further than from Earth to Mars and back.
The combination of cost-cutting, fare increases and image change produced faster returns than we thought it would. So it went from 16 million a year loss to well above £50 million a year net profit.
25 years after she was designed, Concorde had become a financial success and the ultimate status symbol. For the rich and famous of the 80s, it was the only way to fly. Concorde was an airliner like no other, so ahead of her time, she could travel as fast as the most technically advanced military planes. She flew commercially for 27 years, and for a time helped define an entire era. The late 80s was the age of the yuppie. Quick fortunes were being made in the city. Porsche showrooms were selling out daily. And Concorde was the most exclusive form of transport for the rich and powerful.
The passengers who flew on Concorde were either top-end political, top-end business, or VIPs.
They were high-powered business people. Their time was money, because they could get to New York in just over 3 hours instead of 7 or 8 hours.
It makes a great difference. It cuts the jet lag. And just that extra 3 hours makes a great difference.
In an earlier age, before we had mobile phones and all the technological digital stuff we have now, meeting face-to-face is the most important thing.
I'd leave here at 8 o'clock in the morning, go over to New York. I would do a full day's work and then get on the Concorde and get back, and I'd be sitting in that seat at 9:45 waiting for the 10 o'clock news.
Concorde had become a global icon. In 1986, it appeared on the cover of Executive Travel magazine with Fred Finn, the world's most travelled businessman.
He had flown on the aeroplane, I think, more than anybody else.
It's everywhere, this magazine cover. It really is. And that's a matter of pride, because it was the best of British, and the photograph became an iconic picture.
Fred flew on Concorde almost every week, totalling up 738 flights, more than some of her pilots.
A longer love affair with Concorde than I did with my ex-wife. Or ex-wives, 2 of them.
Concorde's image and speed also attracted celebrities. Any rocker, actor, or model worth their salt wanted to travel in her small but plush cabin. And because there were no class divisions on board, everyone mixed in this exclusive club.
If you got a few celebrities on board, you got that party atmosphere.
You could be sitting next to Mick Jagger or Sting,
John Travolta,
Princess Diana,
Eric Clapton,
Michael Douglas,
Paul Newman,
Bruce Springsteen,
Tom Selleck,
Elton John,
Elizabeth Taylor,
Paul McCartney several times. He'd sit on the aircraft and draw funny faces.
Richard Nixon,
Michael Winner.
Certainly a memorable one was Muhammad Ali.
Johnny Cash was a big buddy of mine.
Sir Richard Attenborough.
Elvis Costello.
I flew with Dolly.
Tom Cruise and Robert De Niro.
My personal favourite was Rudolf Nureyev.
Mick stood up and we had our photograph taken together, which was lovely.
When you're on Concorde, everybody that was on there talked to each other. David Frost, not so much. He used to sit in the back all the time.
As well as being the plane of choice for celebrities, Concorde was also to get the royal seal of approval, with the Queen using her for state visits.
I was one of 3 captains who took Her Majesty the Queen to Washington, but I mean, that was the most enormous, huge privilege to have done that.
Concorde was a favourite of Princess Diana, who was given privileged access to the cockpit. Even the Queen Mother couldn't resist asking for a spin round Britain for her 85th birthday.
She thoroughly enjoyed it and asked a lot of very pertinent questions. Lord King knew the Queen Mother. He invited her for a flight from London up to Scotland and then supersonic down the North Sea. And then as we turned in to Heathrow, I said, Your Majesty, I think there's a place you're familiar with down there. And she said, oh, Buckhouse. And I said, yes, the Buckingham Palace, indeed it is, Your Majesty. And fortunately, I did rather good landing that day. I don't think they knew it was on the ground. But
To match the exclusive clientele's expectations, the Concorde division handpicked its cabin crew, training them harder and longer than any of their colleagues.
I think we felt like we were a bit special because there was so few of us. There were only, I think, a couple of hundred of us licensed on the aircraft at any one time.
The cabin crew even got a separate uniform to distinguish them from the rest of BA.
The designer, Hardy Amis, has aimed for an adaptable wardrobe. He's made everything washable and interchangeable. A versatile tank top in cashmere to slip on with dress or trousers.
Yeah, very fashionable at the time. If you look back on them now, they do look a little dated.
A trouser suit, smart and practical for working girls constantly on the move 11 miles up.
It was a tough as well as glamorous life. Concorde's speed meant service on the London to New York run had to be performed in half the normal time.
it would be the absolute top champagnes, top cuisine, top everything.
You're drinking the best champagne, you're having the best food. The service is better than first class. It's Concorde class.
The food on Concorde was delicious. It was very, very nice. It was on a tray, the pre-plated hors d'oeuvre. There was a flower, and we would lay down a white damask tablecloth.
Little caviar boats that came up as the hors d'oeuvre.
We always had the finest fillet steak, the best smoked salmon, the best king prawns, all those 80s elements. It was amazing.
And then we would put down the dessert. Everything was just lovely. And then offer coffees and liqueurs.
And in those days, if you can believe it or not, we used to dish out Macanudo cigars, and passengers could light up their cigars and smoke cigars.
We served vintage wines and champagne. But even if we just opened one bottle of champagne for one passenger and he had half a glass, we had to throw them all down the sink because we couldn't land with an open bottle. We sometimes had to drink on landing.
Although Concorde was a luxury brand, the marketing team decided it was time to bring it within reach of the public. For a relatively modest £300, it offered them hour-long supersonic flights around the Bay of Biscay.
It was a wonderful success. It allowed everybody and anybody who was prepared to spend a few hundred quid to have the experience of Concorde.
My wife and I were standing in the garden here because we're on the flight path, and it came over and we both looked at each other. I says, "Do you fancy?" She says, "Yes." And we came in, got straight on the telephone and booked 2 tickets. Walking up the steps, that's when the goosebumps really started. You know, it's happening. The captain was John Hutchinson, and he welcomed us on board.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Hutchinson. I'm the Concorde captain today.
He said, "You're in for a treat because it's bank holiday and we've got a big crowd here and we've got to put a show on for them." He says, "We're going to do a takeoff using full afterburners."
I think all the passengers thought the takeoff was the most exciting thing about the flight. It was a very dynamic takeoff. I mean, when you opened those throttles, you knew that aeroplane wanted to get into the air.
He said, "Right, I'm building the revs up now. We're releasing the brakes and here we go." And I felt as though there was an enormous hand on my chest, gently, it wasn't uncomfortable, pressing me back into the seat. It making me fill up just thinking about it. It's that good. And away we went down the runway and hurtled down there. And he lifted off and we literally went up just off the vertical. I couldn't believe it.
We used to give them loads of champagne, they used to have a meal, and then, like a military operation, we used to get them in the flight deck, they used to get their photograph taken, they get a signed certificate, and there'd be a running commentary going the whole time this was happening.
As you can imagine, the charter flights, there was a totally different atmosphere. It was a wonderful party right the way through.
It was electric, I think. Everyone was on a high, just a general buzz all round.
The affordable charter flights helped boost the business even more and were unique to British Airways.
The British took Concorde on joyrides. So this great elite aircraft could be for anybody that wanted to go for a jaunt around the Bay of Biscay or Flapsy Father Christmas in Finland. Concorde was a part of the British experience in a way it wasn't in France.
I think it was a unique aircraft. It's a one-off, and never in my lifetime did I ever think I would fly at twice the speed of sound.
If ever you got slightly jaded and ever it became just another job, if you did one of those charters and you see the sparkle in the eyes of the 100 passengers and the enthusiasm and the excitement, and it was part of making sure that that was a really, really, really memorable day for them, and in doing that it became a memorable day for us as well.
Its loss-making period now a distant memory, Concorde spent the 90s as the jewel in BA's crown. But as a new decade began, one flight would bring its glory days to an abrupt and horrifying end. Concorde was an elite plane, technically generations ahead of any other aircraft. It therefore took an elite band of pilots to fly her.
Concorde's not a more difficult airplane to fly, it's just different. And because it does such special things, there are lots and lots of different systems that aren't on a conventional airplane. So consequently, there's a lot to learn.
The pilot training program began in 1974, 2 years before Concorde came into commercial use. It was notoriously difficult and 3 times longer than a normal training course.
It was a grueling course, and from beginning to end it took 6 long months. And this was for somebody who'd been flying airplanes for 25 years at that stage.
At the beginning, half the captains who went onto it failed the course.
These guys had been flying probably Lancaster bombers during the war, and they didn't fail the course because the airplane was difficult to fly. They failed because they couldn't get their brains sort of mentally ahead of the airplane when they were flying at Mach 2 across the Atlantic.
Getting pilots up to speed involved 2 months of intensive study in Bristol, where Concorde was designed and built. Pilots had to pass weekly exams before they could progress further.
You then did something like 85 hours in the flight simulator.
When the simulator was built, it cost £3 million, a staggering 30 million in today's money.
So here we are on the only serviceable Concorde simulator in the world. It looks like we're at Heathrow because the visuals are so realistic. And we're about to take off just like the pilots did when they were being trained, like I did and all my colleagues did. We're about to take off on 27 left. The reheats go on. Open up the throttles to full power. 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 engines developing 38,000 pounds of thrust each. Accelerators very rapidly down the runway. We're already doing 100 miles an hour. Next call's V1, the last time that we can abandon the takeoff should we have a problem. V1, and the next course rotate when I'm going to pull back on the control column to pitch Concorde's nose up to the climb-out attitude. And we lift off. Off go the green lights, positive climb, up comes the gear. Approaching 250 knots, the reheats go off and we throttle back and reduce the engine power.
After 7 weeks in the simulator, the pilots would then have to pass a test before finally getting their hands on the real thing.
Then there was the base flying, in other words, circuits and landings on Concorde. It's a very, very different animal to fly than any subsonic aeroplane.
With 4 Olympus engines accelerating Concorde twice as fast as a Formula One car, the pilot's first flight was always a daunting one.
The adrenaline rush is amazing because it's a powerful old beast.
The first takeoff is still a surprise for anybody that gets on it.
We didn't have full tank loads of fuel, so the airplane was very light, and the performance of the airplane was like a sort of fighter plane.
It was astounding. It was really magnificent to have all that power in your hand, and there we were, rushing down the runway.
I can remember opening those throttles up and the airplane blasted off down the runway like a scalded cat. It was a fantastic feeling.
She leapt off down the runway, rather like Tom and Jerry, and Tom holds Jerry's tail and then lets go. Choo! This thing just leapt out of a trap. All I hear is suddenly airspeed building, 100 knots, V1, rotate, and I'm going, oh God, pull this thing back up to about 20 degrees, and she's climbing like a homesick angel. It was incredibly difficult to stop the airplane climbing up. It had this instinct. It wanted to fly, and it wanted to fly fast.
With their training complete, the Concorde pilots were now able to fly the only plane that could compete with top-secret military aircraft.
We met some of the Blackbird spy plane pilots, and they told us the story where they were flying over Cuba at 60,000 feet and in their bone domes and spacesuits, and 2 of them cooped up there. And then air traffic control said, could you just move 30 miles to the north? They asked, well, why? I said, well, because of the Concorde coming past. And they said it was just surreal, that just over there was a Concorde with 100 people in shirt and blouses and drinking champagne whilst they're in their spacesuits. I said, that, to me, was the best example of what the technical achievement was.
Concorde's speed, rigorous pilot training, and supreme in-flight luxury was an unbeatable combination. In some years during the 90s, it generated the lion's share of BA's annual profit. But as the new millennium arrived, the unthinkable happened. In July 2000, Air France Flight 4590 crashed on takeoff from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris.
My first actual action was to pick the phone up and ring my counterpart in Air France, and he had just arrived at the accident scene. And that really drove home that it was about the people, the 109 people on board the airplane and the 4 people on the ground who sadly lost their lives. And it was my and my colleagues' determination to totally understand what happened and to make sure that that accident could never happen again.
Concorde had a full flight with 96 German tourists heading to New York to start a 3-week luxury cruise. Knowing the flight would have unusually heavy baggage, the captain decided to take extra fuel into Concorde's tanks, located in the wings.
The captain elected to override the normal refueling process, which cut off the refueling at about 82–83% of tank capacity, so you've got some airspace left in each tank. You can override that. He chose to do that, had all those fuel tanks filled up completely full.
The crew knew that they were taking off over a ton over the maximum takeoff weight. That's still illegal and still dangerous. But what the crew didn't know was that there was an unknown number of bags, something between 19 and 28 bags, that weren't on the load sheet, so they weren't included in the weight of the aircraft, or put in the rear baggage hold.
The crew were unaware of something else. A small piece of aircraft debris ahead of them on the runway.
During the course of the takeoff run, the front right-hand tower on the left-hand undercarriage leg went over this strip of metal that had been left by a Continental Airlines DC-10. And that strip of metal carved off a 4.5 kilo lump of rubber.
The airplane was doing 200 plus miles an hour with the rotational energy of the wheel. That's a massive amount of energy, and this big piece of tyre goes up and flies into the underside of the wing.
It set up a shockwave in that fuel tank, and there was no airspace in it. So it was not a penetration of rubber into the wing, it was an explosion or a burst of fuel out of the wing.
The ruptured tank poured out aviation fuel at 100 litres a second. This then ignited due to a spark from the damaged undercarriage. On its own, that was catastrophic enough. But in the aftermath of the crash, the British Air Investigation Team made a shocking discovery.
A few weeks after the accident, I was going around with one of the British Airways Concorde engineers, and we had a look at the main landing gear, and it rapidly became apparent that there was a piece missing.
A couple of days before the crash, the engineers had stripped down the left-hand undercarriage, and in the process of reassembling it, they'd failed to put in there a component called a spacer.
There are two wheel bearings, one at each side, and to keep the bearings in place, there is this aluminium spacer.
With the spacer missing, those wheels had the ability to wobble around like wheels on a supermarket trolley. And those wheels skewed around and steered the airplane off the left-hand side of the runway.
The veering left actually put them pretty much on a collision course with a 747 that was waiting to cross the runway they were taking off on. Incidentally, that had President Chirac on board, I believe. So the crew at that point of the Concorde probably felt they had little choice but to lift the aircraft off.
A dangerously overweight Concorde was travelling too slow to fly safely, veering off the runway with a ruptured tyre on a wobbly wheel and leaking combustible fuel from its wing.
It sort of staggered up to 200 feet and it never remotely reached its safety speed. And of course all this fuel was pouring out of tank number 5 in a flaming torch. And for whatever reason, the flight engineer set off into doing a fire drill, uncommanded by the captain.
The flight engineer unilaterally shut the engine down. Drills are just, you don't do anything until you've got safe flying speed. Even a burning engine is producing you some power. And unfortunately, the moment the flight engineer shut that engine down, the fate of everyone on that airplane was sealed.
The airplane just sort of reared up, went into about 110 degrees of bank and crashed down into the hotel in Gurness.
The crash killed all 109 passengers and crew, and another 4 people on the ground. It made worldwide headlines, and the search for answers to what had caused it was immediate.
There was a meeting not long after the accident when the sequence of events was established with the British and French investigators, and it was decided that it should be recommended that Concorde was grounded until some action was taken.
For the next 15 months, the Concorde team made modifications to the plane in all the key areas that appeared to cause the crash.
Today we're putting the first of 150 Kevlar and rubber liners inside the tanks. And these are designed to ensure that the tank can't give that massive fuel leak that we had in Paris. And if you can't have the massive fuel leak, you can't have the massive fire.
The team also fitted a new, more puncture-resistant tyre. And the cables on the undercarriage that may have ignited the fire were armoured with a flexible steel covering.
So by taking out those three links, this aeroplane was now so modified, so safe, that that accident was absolutely impossible.
By 2001, Concorde was nearly ready to be certified as fit for service once more. But on the day of the very first passenger test flight, there was a much more significant event, and it would change the course of Concorde's future. Following the Paris crash in 2000, Concorde underwent a series of modifications. Before being certified as safe to fly again, there had to be a test flight with a full load of passengers. It was scheduled for September the 11th, 2001.
We needed to take a simulated passenger flight from London to New York. So we needed 100 passengers, and so we used the British Airways staff. We didn't go to New York, we went halfway to New York and back, so it's the same length. And everything had gone really, really well.
The flight was impeccably brilliant. I went up to the flight deck to see the guys. Mike Bannister was flying her. In fact, he took a very nice picture of me while I was up there. And the mood was fantastic. There was nothing wrong with the airplane at all.
All of the passengers got off, and I stood at the door saying cheerio to all of them. And the last person to get off was Ricky Baston, who's a ground engineer on Concorde, and I knew him very, very well. And about 2 minutes later, he reappeared with a mobile phone to his ear, and his face was ashen. And it was the time when the first airplane had flown into the World Trade Center.
The elation just went to a feeling of ice cold. And to think that I was up there enjoying this lovely supersonic flight, drinking champagne, and I felt guilty because this evil mayhem was going on in the United States at the same time.
9/11 had a phenomenal impact on the aviation business. Firstly, there were quite a lot of regular business customers who lost their lives, actually physically in the building. Secondly, people became somewhat more cautious about flying.
It knocked the stuffing out of the airline industry. Of course, you know, airliners have been used as weapons and people became scared to fly.
BA's Concorde did resume service 2 months after 9/11, but passenger numbers were drastically down.
Airlines have responded to the reluctance to fly by slashing these schedules by some 18,000 seats. After a year of heightened security and industry reassurances, this is one firm indication of remaining anxiety amongst some passengers.
It would be a tough 18 months for British Airways and the Concorde division, but eventually business began to pick up. For Air France, though, it was a different story.
Air France are finding itself flying with very pathetic passenger loads. They were carrying sort of 6 or 8 passengers across the Atlantic from Paris.
Unable to recover from the tragedies of Paris and New York, Air France decided to put its Concorde fleet out of service. But that had dire consequences for BA. Without Air France, it would have to shoulder the entire maintenance cost of the Concorde fleet.
BA were looking at £100 million a year, almost £2 million a week, before we could move an airplane an inch, and that's just unsustainable.
And so it proved. In April 2003, BA and Air France both announced they would cease all Concorde flights on the 24th of October that same year.
There's no doubt about it, if it was financially worthwhile, the aircraft could have carried on flying almost indefinitely. And the aircraft went out of service for all the wrong reasons.
Ironically, the announcement of its retirement made the plane more popular than ever.
Everyone always wanted at some point in their life to fly Concorde, and as soon as it became obvious there were not very many months left before the thing would be consigned to a museum, everyone was booking seats.
For the next 6 months, every BA flight was fully booked, with passengers seizing the last opportunity to fly supersonic. The final scheduled flight was from New York to London. At Heathrow, tens of thousands turned up to see Concorde for the last time.
It's such a sad thing that it's... I know. We feel something's gone now.
The fact that it is being phased out, I think is quite shocking and very saddening. It's very weird to think that it's not going to be in the skies anymore.
Three Concordes flew into Heathrow 2 minutes apart. Mike Bannister was at the controls of the third, the last Concorde to touch down at Heathrow.
The Heathrow Fire Service had laid on a validatory arch of water cannon for us. As we come towards the water arch, it's flag in, close window. Oh no, window's jammed. Underwater arch, and the whole fire hose came into the cockpit through the window. And I am absolutely dripping wet.
On the ground, BA laid on a lavish reception for VIPs and celebrities who'd travelled on the plane over the past 27 years.
It's been a plane for Britain to be proud of, and we even built it with cooperation with the French. That's pretty rare these days, too.
I was the last person to leave, so we've got 5 Concordes parked outside where we had the reception, and I'm the only person walking across, and that's when it hit me. There are 5 perfectly serviceable Concordes that we have just stopped flying.
14 years after that final passenger flight, the planes are now museum pieces dotted around the globe. Thousands still flock to see them every year, reminders of what was once hailed as the future of aviation, and far removed from the budget airliners of today.
Concourse designers in the 1960s could never have conceived what actually happened to aviation. Everyone thought things would get quicker. In reality, everything has got cheaper.
But it still may not be the end for supersonic travel. Today now, there are a handful of plans emerging that follow in Concorde's path. The Boom project in the USA is one. Those behind it propose building a small 50-seater jet made of composite materials that could fly as fast as its illustrious predecessor.
So I think that'll be the first stage of some sort of a successor to Concorde, but I'm quite sure that eventually new technology will enable a full-bodied, full-blooded successor to Concorde to arrive on the scene.
But for now, this remains an airliner apart. A wild dream conceived in the 50s, developed in the 60s, and realized in the 70s. Concorde is still to be equaled, let alone surpassed.
Whatever happens, Concorde has left not just history in its wake, but it has left an enormous database for its subsequent supersonic successors.
People now see it as a success, as an emblem that still looks so futuristic. For a whole generation and a half, it was fantastic. It was ours. You know, we'd done it.
Concorde was part of people's lives for 27 years. And even though it was, on the whole, for people with lots of money to fly on, I think it just moved people's hearts. When you looked up in the sky and saw that machine, there was nothing like it, and there never has been anything like it since. It is the most beautiful aircraft ever built.
Stay with us as we reconstruct that ill-fated flight next in Concorde. 120 seconds that destroyed a dream next. Two squabbling gladiators forced to fight each other. It's hot and heavy in every way. Spartacus Blood and Sand next over on 5 Spike.